As before, I want to start on the backend, now in the user.js file here in the routes folder, because I'm going to create a user-related route. Which route? Well, the one which allows me to sign up a user, because signing up a user is the basis for all the rest. I can't log in a user if I don't have one, right? So in this user.js file, the goal is to first export the router like we do in the messages or in the app.js file. So I'm just going to copy all the code from the app.js file and put it in here, because I want to set up the same router. Of course, I will work on this route here though. It's not a GET route, it will be a POST route, because creating a user will be a POST request. We're creating a resource on the server in the end. Here, of course, this general function here is right, but I don't want to render a response. Instead, I want to use my Mongoose user model I created here in the models folder in the user.js file. This specifies how a user should look like, how we create a user. So to do this, I will first import this here, so store it in the user variable and require it from the models folder and then the user.js file. And then in my router post method here, in this post route, I want to create a new user, like I before created a new message using this model, but here the user model, of course. I'll pass a JavaScript object which contains the data with which I want to create a user. Now, the data we need can again be seen here in the user model. A first name, a last name, the password, and an email. And the messages, well, that's something I'll come back to. Let's first stick to the 4 fields we start with. So here I want to pass the first name, and I can retrieve this from the body of my request. As before, when I created a new message, here, I simply assume that I get this data. Since I'm the one creating this application, I can make this assumption. So here I get the first name, and then I can simply duplicate this 3 times to also get my last name, thereafter to get the password, and then finally the email. Now this will generally create a new all-user object, but it does have one big security flaw. Do you see which one? It's the password. The password is stored in plain text here. I'm not encrypting my password, and this is something you never ever want to do. Now, as a side note, you also want to submit it via SSL. I'm not doing this here in the local development environment, but on a real server, you might really think about using SSL to encrypt the data you send over your network. So using SSL makes your app more secure, but one thing you definitely have to do either way is encrypt the password you store in the database. Now, how do we encrypt the password here? Thankfully, there are third-party packages we can use for this. So I will cancel my build process here and install such a package. The package I'll use for this can be installed via npm install --save to install it as a production dependency, and then the name is bcrypt.js, which is a package allowing us to easily implement this hashing or the encryption of this password. So after installing this, we can now import it here. Let's name it bcrypt. And of course, we need to require it from bcrypt.js here. And thereafter, hashing is very, very simple. For the password here, for the value I want to assign to this password, I use my bcrypt variable here. And then I can call hash sync, which means basically hash it synchronously. So here, I then pass my plain text as the first argument, so this password I want to encrypt, and the second argument are the number of salting rounds. Now, salting is basically the algorithm or the strength of this algorithm. It defines how strong this encryption is. So let's put this to 10, for example. And with this setup, we're storing an encrypted password. Be aware, this encrypted password is a one-way encryption. You can't decrypt it. If you wonder how we then later on can check if the password the user uses for logging in is the same as the one stored in the database, I'll come back to this question in the login section. For now, be aware that we're storing a safe password at this point. So with this user set up in a safe way, I can now call the save method on this user. And here I'll add the default callback you already know. Now I first want to check for errors, and I can use my error check code from the messages.js file here. It's the same, checking if error exists, and in which case I would pass the error here and return from this function. But if we don't get an error, I will set the status code to 201 for resource was created, and I will pass some JSON data with the response. In this object I'm passing here, I'll set a message of, let's say, user created, and then I will pass my result as the object attached to this object here. So the result of this operation, the user who was created. And this is my backend function. This is all I want to do here. This is the route which allows me to create a new user. Now the missing piece is to use this user.js file in the routes folder, in the app.js file in the root folder. Here we right now only handle the /message routes and then all other routes, but we're not importing the routes in our user.js file. Therefore I will duplicate this import up here and set up the user routes variable, importing my user.js file in the routes folder. And then down here I will duplicate the message route. And now it's up to you which path you want to have in the URL. I will manage, or I will store all of that in the user path here. Make sure to not interfere with any paths you might have configured in your Angular 2 application in this setup here. So here I can then set up my user routes. With that, the backend is prepared. The next step is to connect the front end to the backend.